Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing unusual signs your ex is hurting. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Check out my socials for extra content. The links are in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing unusual signs your ex is hurting. So if you've been through a breakup, you will likely wonder how your ex is feeling. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 unusual signs that your ex is hurting. So let's get straight into this. And point number 1 is engaging in reckless behaviour. So if you find out through social media, friends of friends, or maybe you see with your own eyes that your ex is behaving in a way which is not only different to how you remember, but also somewhat risky or reckless, this can be a sign that they're struggling. This can be a sign that they're hurting. Now, the reason for this is because people can do unusual things, you might say, as an attempt to distract themselves from the emotional pain and turmoil that they're experiencing. And this can be very destructive. You know, obviously, if you are doing dangerous things, if you are behaving in a reckless way, this is unlikely to end positively. Now, we're not talking about taking a controlled risk. We're not talking about living your life in a way where you take on challenges and you try to be as brave as possible and you might have a fall every now and again. No, we're talking about things which are very reckless, very risky, and often impulsive as well. Now, there are many examples, an infinite amount that we could give, but let's just give some nonetheless. Let's say, for instance, that your ex was never someone who gambled. Okay, they were not a gambler, they never gambled. And yet you've now found out that they're gambling, and not only just starting to gamble every now and again, or maybe they've just gone to a casino for the first time. No, they're now starting to wager huge sums of money on things that they perhaps actually have no interest or knowledge on. Maybe you find out that your ex is living a way where they are burning through cash in a way which is going to be very detrimental to their lifestyle. You know, you should never gamble things that you can't afford to lose. If you are going to gamble something, and if you are legally allowed to gamble something, it should only be something that you are comfortable losing, because the likelihood is that it could easily happen. There is never a safe bet. So if, for instance, you did hear that your ex is behaving in that kind of way, then that would be a surefire sign that they were attempting to distract their own selves from that emotional pain, and therefore a sure sign, if not unusual, that they are hurting. But that is just one of many examples. Let's just give another out there. Let's say, for instance, that your ex was someone who was always very careful in what they did. Maybe you used to think they played it a bit too safe, and now all of a sudden you found out that they've taken on a dangerous new hobby. What that might be, well, use your imagination. It could be some type of martial art class. It could be some type of bungee jumping event. It could be anything that you put your mind to where you can consider that would be deemed dangerous or reckless for them to be doing. Now, of course, there'll be people listening and saying, well, those types of things aren't dangerous if you do them properly. And of course, you've got to use your common sense here. In controlled environments, these things can all be somewhat safe, if not almost always safe. But there are going to be differing examples, and if you compare that to who your ex is as a person, you can really see the differential. If your ex wouldn't say boo to a goose, as the saying goes, and now all of a sudden they're doing these crazy combat sport type things, well, that can be a real clear example of how they're trying to mask that emotional pain. It might not necessarily be the most life-threatening situation in a controlled environment, but it's very different to what they would normally do. However, there are things which are not controlled, maybe even illegal, maybe doing things which are not only risky, reckless and dangerous, but also there is absolutely no way of making sure that this could be safe. You know, the type of things that could be happening, which are illegal, which police, if they were to find out, would be arresting your ex, and that's probably the best option, because if they didn't, then something much worse could happen instead. Those are the types of things that if you find out your ex is doing, and sometimes you've got to consider an ex will actually tell you. You know, they might be trying to do it for themselves to mask this pain, but they might be almost doing it as a cry for help, for you to get back in a relationship with them. They might literally come and tell you, text you, call you, in front of you, speak to you, show you the problems they're going through, show you their injuries they may have already sustained. They might be doing this as a way to try and get you to take them back. Now, if that happens, you shouldn't be taking anybody back because they are blackmailing you and you feel worried about them. Instead, you need to get them the professional support that they need. You need to speak with people, probably even the authorities, if necessary. You shouldn't be doing anything you don't want to. So if you don't want to get back in a relationship, you shouldn't be trying to have your hand forced by someone threatening to do bad things to themselves if you don't get back together. So please always contact the authorities if necessary, certainly friends and family of your ex, to try and help out in this. But sometimes it's not as obvious. Maybe it's just through subtle social media things that you may read or see. Either way, this is a huge, unusual sign that your ex is hurting. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is becoming overly opinionated. Now today we're speaking about unusual signs that your ex is hurting. And point number 2 is they become overly opinionated, but not in any kind of way, in a more specific way we're looking at regarding social and political issues. Now maybe your ex was not someone who was ever really bothered about what was going on in the world socially or politically. And now you find out that they seem to be very much involved. Maybe they are speaking about it online, maybe they tell them themselves, maybe they are telling mutual friends, family, and you find out through a third party. Either way, this can be a real big sign that your ex is trying to attempt to channel that emotional turmoil into something that they can control. And often, this could be a social or political issue. Now, there might be other examples, but this is the one that I have seen the most when I've spoke to many people over the years. You do see people who didn't really have much interest in what was going off in politics, for instance. Now all of a sudden, it's a real huge deal to them. And look, if you've freshly become single, if you're freshly out of a breakup, one of the things you have is more time. Whether you are the dumper or the dumpee, you have more time on your hands right now. And this could be something that you try to fill your time by learning what's going on in the world right now. Maybe you now have an interest, whereas perhaps before you didn't. And before you know it, you can be drawn into causes, you can be drawn into thoughts and feelings that maybe you weren't too bothered about before. Now, this isn't to say that these social or political issues are bad. I mean, in some instances they might be, but it doesn't mean that they have to be. You know, this isn't like point number 1, where in point number 1 we were speaking about reckless behaviour, risky, dangerous, impulsive decisions and behaviour. Those types of things, that was point number 1. Point number 2 doesn't have to be dangerous or reckless per se. So it doesn't mean that they have to be interested in something which is going to get them into trouble in some regard. It doesn't mean it has to be that, although it could be. But ultimately, if you find out that your ex is spending a lot more of their time and energy by dedicating themselves to something which could be deemed as a cause, you often find is when somebody's trying to channel emotional turmoil into something they can control. Because perhaps right now, they don't feel that they can. Maybe your ex is the dumpee and they feel completely blindsided by the breakup. Perhaps your ex is the dumper, but they've come to the conclusion that the decision they made was wrong. They have been living their life trying to find a better path, you might say, which is why they ended your relationship, but they've come to the point and the moment where they've realised it was wrong. It wasn't what they really wanted. They made a huge mistake, and now they regret their decision, and hence we see the behaviours that I'm speaking about in today's podcast, including here in point number 2, becoming overly opinionated. And that is what we look for. Social media is a real clear way of seeing point number 2, because previously your ex wouldn't have said anything at all, and now all of a sudden all of their posts are about social or political issues. Okay, so you can clearly see that difference, and maybe that resonates with you. It doesn't matter whether you or your ex are the dumper or the dumpee. This can happen on both sides. Okay, it doesn't really matter. But if you see this, it is a surefire, if not somewhat unusual sign that your ex is going through pain right now. And nobody wants to see their ex go through pain. Even if you feel sometimes that you went through a bad breakup and you think, look, I want them to feel the pain that I feel right now, I very much doubt that you want them to be going through the turmoil which they might be doing if you see some of these signs, especially if you want to get your ex back. If you want to reconnect, you don't want them going through pain, and therefore it could actually be an interesting thing to notice, because if you think, okay, my ex is going through pain probably, I don't want them to, but what does this mean? Well, it probably means they are on the verge of wanting to reconnect with you. Now, whether or not you want to reconnect with them, I can't say. I don't know your position. I don't know if you are the dumper or the dumpee. I don't know their position on this. I don't know how you felt back at the time of the breakup compared to how you feel now. But if your ex is showing any of the signs spoken about in today's podcast, there is a strong possibility that they are on the verge of wanting to reconnect with you. If not, they always had done. Maybe they did from the beginning because they are the dumpee. Maybe they were the dumper and they've only recently come to this decision. But it can be that sign you're looking for. So if you want to get your ex back, it's something really to look out for. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the build-up of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is subtle imitation. Now this really is an unusual sign that your ex could be going through pain and ultimately is missing you. And that is subtle imitation of your behaviour. So what we're looking for here are clues and signs that your ex is imitating you, whether this is your mannerisms, your speech patterns, the way you type things. These types of things can be a sign that your ex is hurting and missing you. Now we have to consider that imitation can be a sign of flattery. Someone who is imitating someone else is at least subconsciously believing that that is probably a positive way to be and to live their life. I'm not talking about when someone mocks someone. Obviously, I'm talking about when they're doing it without even realizing. That is because they are finding that person to be someone that they want to imitate. And why would you do that? Well, you see them as a positive influence, positive in whatever way you want to dress this up and think about it. But in this context, it's likely because they are missing their ex. It's likely because they are putting their ex on a pedestal. This is why this is more likely to happen. And if we consider that someone is emotionally attached to their ex, so i.e. your ex is emotionally attached still to you, then this is when they're almost struggling to find their own identity. They can't be themselves because who is themselves? They've lost themselves. You are who they want. You are who they're going to act like. Now, you might notice this on social media. You may be told by friends or family, hey, I bumped into your ex and really kind of weird. They didn't seem themselves from what I remember. Instead, they was almost talking like you. they're acting like you. They're dressing like you. Now that could be a clue, but often this is seen by the ex showcasing this to their former partner in person. Now maybe you don't see your ex anymore. Maybe you still do. Maybe you work together. Maybe you have children together. Maybe you bump into each other fairly frequently. And maybe you pick up on it. You pick up on the fact that your ex is almost speaking like you, wearing a similar style to you, behaving like you, when maybe they never used to. And you're thinking, well, why are they doing this? Well, often this isn't something that they're planning. It's not something that they are aiming to do. It's just because that they are so attached to you in their subconscious that this behavior is just seeping out without them meaning it. And this is why, if you see it, if you feel it, this is often not a plan by your ex. This is often not something they're trying to do to get you back. It's just something which is coming out automatically because of their level of feeling, the desire, the fact that they miss you so much, and they are struggling to find their own identity. So if you are wondering, is my ex hurting? And you hear, see, feel this from your ex? Yes, I would say they are hurting. Yes, I would say they are missing you. And yes, I would say that they do want to get back in a relationship with you.